Everyone, Reloader back with you once again, and I thought now that the Dillon XL750 build is complete, I would do a single video that highlights each one of the upgrades and or improvements or changes that I made to the standard press. And obviously, as you can see here, this was the cover that I had made, and I think I'll start from the bottom now that we've done the cover and work my way up, and that will start with the primer catcher system. So at the bottom of the press is the primer catch system, essentially just a blue bottle with a hole drilled into it, a coupler, and a clear half-inch tube that allows me to catch all the primers as the decapper sends them into the tube, because I wasn't really a big fan of the original system configuration. So let me pop the cover and we'll go into that. So by removing both the primer catcher plate and the blue primer cup that would sit right in here, this little, I think it was about $13 piece that is zip tied in, now takes care of catching all the primers 100%, nothing to jump inside a little box when the box gets full, to have to empty the box. So to me it was just a cleaner solution, and it reminded me, and I got the idea from the Hornady solution. So there's a lot of things on this press that remind me of the Hornady. In fact, a lot of similarities between what Hornady has implemented and what Dillon has changed from, say, the 650 into the 750. So I think it's a much better system going to a primer catch feed as opposed to in a bottle, as opposed to a cup, a primer catch cup. So in sticking with working my way up from the bottom, I'll also talk about the Inline Fab riser mount. Years and years ago, when I did both the Hornady and a couple of other presses, I reached out to Dan and had him custom make some riser mounts that had a plate, just like this particular configuration, and he now has a pre-configure pair. I think they're 4 inches and 7 and some change. I want to say 7.5, 7 3/4, and this is the 4-inch riser that gives me just the perfect amount of space to get the press up to where it's comfortable, not too high with the ergo handle. And since I mentioned the ergo handle, that would be the next upgrade. Very comfortable with the ergo handle. I've had this with my Hornady for ever and a day. Love the roller, love the shape, the movement on it, or at least what I have to do for the movement of the ram. Very comfortable, and adding that 4-inch riser just makes it that much more comfortable for me. Since we're near the back of the press, I'll talk about the Allen wrenches, hex wrenches. I picked up the Dillon tool set, or rather the hex set, and the wrench holder. Had that mounted into a piece of oak that was previously installed on a very similar set of wrenches for my Hornady. So now these will serve as both wrenches for the Hornady as well as the Dillon. But love the mount. Gives me just the right amount of lift, and has things kind of out of the way. And the ergo handle, in my opinion, is a winner. So this is probably displaying my OCD-ness, as well as concern about cleanliness and parts rusting. The dies are steel. And I did this primarily because I've done it with my Hornadys, especially with the Hornady powder measures being very steel-centric and constantly lubing them. So I had a cover made for the powder measure Not a whole lot of steel here, more aluminum than anything else, but obviously with the dies and some of the other components and the springs, there is that factor to consider. Since we're talking about the powder measure, you've probably seen, or maybe not, my rant on the standard Hornady, or excuse me, the standard Dillon powder measure. I upgraded the ability to precisely control how much powder is dispensed with this particular custom mod. This powder measure would have been turned the other way. In fact, the failsafe rod would have gone here or tucked into here, which means it was situated right about here. So this would have been facing probably 4 o'clock if this was a clock. And that was constantly hitting and getting stuck on my Hornady bullet feed tube and die. So when I talked to Dillon, their recommendation was to remove the powder failsafe rod, and also the little sheet metal piece that was here that clipped onto it. So the failsafe rod was deleted, and I went to these 2 springs, which turns this measure into what would have been a pre-2000 powder drop. So the springs are what return it to its starting position, as opposed to the failsafe rod that would have been installed here or here, right about here with a standard configuration. This allowed me to move the powder measure to a better position that allowed me to use the dies I wanted to without having to move over to, say, a Lee measure or something to that effect. Something I also did, and let me see if I get this in frame, was put in, here's the standard Dillon cap, was to put in a bullet strainer, bullet powder strainer. So obviously when you're making sure that your powder drop has the correct grains, you're dumping you're doing your bullet puller, and you're dumping your bullet with your powder, whether that's with powder, with a bullet without. It's in the bullet puller, and just dumping that in there without having to worry about the bullet falling into the powder was a nice little add. So I was happy about that. So between the strainer, the springs, the adjustment, the powder bar adjustment, and locking, I was thinking about installing a quick release for the powder measure, so that when I need to empty the powder back into the jug, I was able to do that. But because I need this locked in this position so it doesn't hit either the primer tube feeder or any of the other dies or any of the other parts of the press by being able to move around, which the quick release would allow this to float some, I opted not to do that. So if I need to remove powder, I will pull the entire tool head and dump powder that way. I've seen a couple of third-party methods of pulling the charge bar and putting an adapter in and then dumping powder that way, and that just seems to be too much work for my preferences. So again, this is how I have my setup running, and everybody else will have their own take on what they prefer to do. So while we're here, I opted for the double alpha case feeder, and I do not keep that mounted on the press when not in use, because it's big and it's easy to get knocked around, and there's no reason to have that on there. But this is the tubes, again, from Double Alpha, and I picked up another bolt from one of the big box shops, and put that in there for what I would call extra support, so that when this is on here, and if I get it in there right, it has that extra support, so that when you're twisting, there's something else to help hold that up. So I like this because I have something very similar on my Hornady, so that allows me to not have to worry about case feeding when I'm doing a session. And I believe this is like 100, 150, and I'll be doing 9mm, so roughly around that that number of casings that will allow me to do my reload session. So I'll move the camera around and you'll get a closer view of some other things that I've done. So I'm a huge fan of the RCBS Lockout Die. And one of the big differences between this and, say, the Dillon Powder Cop or some of the other dies out there that don't have any electronics in is that when you set this up correctly and you have a correctly charged case, your press will operate fine. When you have an undercharge or overcharge, so you miss, maybe you short stroke it, there's no more powder, you miss powder, whatever, or you do a double charge for some unknown reason, this die, just as it states, locks the press out, so you won't be able to continue reloading. Whereas any of the other powder check methods, essentially, let me rephrase that, most of the others, like a Dillon powder check or some of the other powder cops, will let you keep reloading. They may alarm, or they may have a little visual indicator that says you have the wrong amount of powder, but they will continue to operate. And I can see other folks' videos. In fact, I'm not a big fan of the even the powder primer alarm, and to have this go off every time you don't have either powder or a particular piece of brass in, and you're doing that would just drive me crazy. So my preference is a mechanical solution, and I have added some visual aids, some additional paint to allow me to keep that always in sync, because the rotation of the brass and the movement and the jiggling of the press through a normal process will move that around, and slight variations will not change the setting. And I found this to be a godsend. So I've had this on my Hornadys for years, and I recently discovered, so if I was going to do something different or consider an upgrade to this, if RCBS and Dillon got together and had a child powder check, it would be what I've seen from Double Alpha, which is the equivalent of this with an audible alarm. So they've taken the best of both worlds and created what I would call a pretty interesting solution. So the Double Alpha equivalent of the powder check or powder cop looks pretty cool. It's about the same price as the Dillon, the RCBS, so you're not paying a premium, but I think you're getting a lot better piece of functionality, because it does the lockout as the RCBS does, but it also gives you the alarm like the Dillon does. So for those of you who like audible, more power to you. In fact, even with my Hornady presses, I've moved away from the primer alarm and gone to, say, a visual guide stick for my primer, because I'm just not a fan of the audibles. So while we're still here on the tool head and discussing the dies, I think you've seen in other videos that I highlighted the Ultimate Lock Rings from Lee. I love these things. Set it, forget it. You got the best of everything. They're small, they fit in tight spaces, they come with their own wrench. You don't have to buy another wrench. They're split ring, they have locks, so you're not damaging the threads by screwing into the locks. They're just all around well thought out pieces of hardware. So I put them on all of the dies, and again, I'm running all RCBS minus obviously the Dillon die for powder. I also decided, I found this by mistake, accident, mistake, either one, and can't remember the company. JF USA is what's stamped on here, and they did a great job of, I think what caught my eye was the anodizing. So you can get an anodized tool head in whatever color you want, And what was really cool to me was the ability to engrave. So this is to me a one-time thing. This tool head will always be 9mm. And I've seen over the years different people do different things. I've seen, labels like I do with my label maker on my Lee turrets. It's easy and quick. There's just no way to get in there and engrave. Engrave is wonderful, permanent, very clean, elegant. I've seen people use marker. Works. I've seen people take, metal stamping kits and stamp in all the Dillon information, which I think is absolutely ridiculous because, again, the one time you load this with your dies, that's, in my opinion, that's what it's going to be forever. And with your caliber conversion kits, for those who do like to run multiple tool heads, your caliber conversion kit is all, probably organized on a single tool head holder as well. So the standard Dillon tool head to me was just kind of blah. Like all the other aluminum that's on the machine, just unfinished. The highest level of finish was right around the edges. So again, before I decided to do this particular solution, I went ahead and polished. I don't know if you can see that was about a 5-minute job on the polishing wheel. So polish that to a nice gloss mirror finish, that not quite mirror, but a high enough gloss that maybe you're not seeing too well on the video. I don't know, with focus and anything else. I was thinking about doing the whole tool head, and then I found this particular solution and I thought, hey, that's a winner. So again, back to my OCD of coordination, having things align and along the same lines in terms of consistency. This just seemed like a no-brainer to me, so I'm happy with that. Moving down, as I jump around a little bit, I'll talk about the easy ones first. The locator pins. I think I got these from Inline Fabrication. Again, that's another win as far as I'm concerned with having to deal with these. I like the locator pin better than the spring with the Hornady, but having just the locator pin without a tab, these things are a little bit of a bear to deal with, especially if old fat fingers. So the tab makes a huge difference in my opinion from a simplicity point of view, and again, color coordinated to some degree. And then I'll give a shout out to Gates Reloading. I stumbled on his site because I was looking for a light, and I've done the Hornady skylight, or whatever it's actually called, for my Dillon, or my the Inline Fab skylight for my Hornady presses, and I've been happy with that. But that's also $40 some odd plus shipping, depending on what your order is. Maybe you don't pay shipping. And this solution, it's got a magnetic base right here on the side, and simple and elegant. I can move this around or do whatever I want where I need the light, and it gives me all the light I could possibly need. And obviously, when I'm reloading, that's not going to be there, but just adjustable to whatever angle or setting I need. And it lights up the whole area without having to get into any of the LEDs that have to either mount under the tool head or come in through the tool head hole for the skylight. And then you've got wires everywhere. You've got adhesive and everything. This is very quick and easy. And what's beautiful is it's removable with a very strong magnet. So and since I've only got one hand free that I can get over there, I'm not going to try and pull that off. But that was a great solution. Since I'm in the back here, you've seen what I've done with either a Reform 223 for 300 blackout, or 223 would work. This is my method for stopping the case feeder, my DIY for free that I read online, and putting that in back of the case feeder stops the case from advancing. So that was a very clean, simple, and cost-effective solution. I didn't even realize that I missed talking about my bullet feeder. So my setup is Station 1 decap resize, Station 2 powder, Station 3 lockout/powder check, Station 4 is bullet feeding, and Station 5 is bullet seat and crimp. Also, again with the RCBS crimper and seater. And I've done the Hornady bullet feeder die with their tubes, their aluminum tubes. And what I liked about the Hornady solution over some of the others out on the market is the fact that this is an aluminum solution, as opposed to like with the case feeder, a clear plastic. So I understand the need to go to the plastic due to weight. And, you know, when you've got 150 cases in there, that's a little heavy. And so will, you know, 40 rounds. I can only imagine 150 rounds of 9mm. That would be extremely heavy there. And if the hardware was made out of something stronger like aluminum, that could be challenging. So I've done this for years. Fill the bullet tube, feed it into the press, pull the cotter pin out, and then you've got your bullets, and those will feed. And again, this was all set up so that everything works quite nicely. What I've then recently discovered, because I was looking back over some emails for somebody who did some custom aluminum work for me, was that there's now a comparable solution to the double alpha case feeder. A competitor offers an aluminum made version, as opposed to, this is all composite and plastic, aluminum for the base component that actually sits in the die. So there's an aluminum version of this that would sit on top of the Hornady. I think it's the Bully adapter who makes that, because years ago I picked up a Bully adapter that sits on top of this, and a very similar type of configuration for feeding in your bullets. And they now have an aluminum version that sits on top of the Hornady bullet feeding die. And if I was to consider that, that would probably be my next potential upgrade. So maybe the double alpha powder check. Again, not such an audible fan, but I like their method of implementing. To me, it's a lot more elegant than what Dillon did, a modern version of what Dillon did. And again, I'm not bashing Dillon. I'm just comparing a product that I prefer one over the other for maybe its feature set. And I'm kind of liking what the Bully adapter did with creating an aluminum version of this. And I can't remember if it's got 4 or 6 tubes like the double alpha, but enough bullets that when you consider what this has with what the bullet feeder would have, I would have to feed this, as I do with my 45 ACP, maybe 2 to 3 times. Three times ish, 2.5 and change for 45 ACP to get 100 rounds, maybe 1.5, 2 times with this for the 9mm. But I like the bullet feed capabilities, because between the bullet feed and the case feed, it gives me a mechanical version of the ammo plant without having all of the electronics, the noise, the weight, the amount of bench space that you lose. So I've essentially copied what I've done with my Hornady lock and load on the Dillon to provide me as much of an automated ammo plant with minimal amount of having to touch bullets or brass to produce my my ammunition. So the last thing I want to talk about is not really an improvement or an upgrade per se on the Dillon, as much as it is on how I approach one of the most tedious tasks related to progressive presses and even turret presses to some degree, depending on which manufacturer you're talking about. So any press that uses a tubular fed mechanism for primers for an inline feeding, as let me lower the camera so you can see what I'm talking about, as the Dillon does, as others do, as Hornady does, as Lyman does on some of their presses. It's just it was an unpleasant surprise, let's put it that way, because for years when I was using my Lee and still use my Lee turret, putting primers in this takes all of like 2 seconds to dump 100 primers in here. And I made a video a few years ago where it takes maybe 5 seconds to flip them around and pop the top on and then seat it, and you're good to go. I don't have a pickup tube on my bench for a progressive press because as soon as I found out with my Hornady that I would have to use a pickup tube, I thought there had to be a better solution out there, and for me the better solution was the Frankfurt Arsenal Vibra-Prime. And what was funny was when I was looking at this 7 years ago at least, around the 2013 time frame, Frankfurt Arsenal had stopped making this, and the price of these were just outrageous on eBay. And there were some copies of, for what this did, and I was just amazed at that price. All right, so the Vibra-Prime, just like the Lee, Lee has its wonderful little case. Vibra-Prime has a very similar thing. One side for large primers, one side for small primers. And it takes a very similar amount of time to throw the primers into this as it does to the Lee. And you pop this into the case. And then you take your... and I'm trying to do this all from behind the camera, so hopefully it's focused. You put your primer tube, your large or small primer tube, and then you do that for like 10 seconds, agitate/tilt, and all of a sudden you've got a tube of primers that are ready to be dumped into your primer feed tube. And that made a world of difference for me because sitting there, and again I timed it, it's to me just not something I enjoy doing, working a primer pickup tube with 100. And if you're just doing 100 rounds of ammo, picking up 100 primers with a pickup tube isn't so bad. But let's say you're doing 400 or 500 rounds, or a marathon session, or more than 100. To me, that's just time not well spent. So I won't call this an upgrade for the Dillon because I've been using it for years with the Hornady, but I will do the same thing with the Dillon simply because it makes life a whole lot easier. So I want to say I think that's all my upgrades, things I've done to the press. I locked down the fail-safe mechanism, so that's not jumping around. I was even able to find blue tie downs that I didn't even know I had. So I think that is about it, and now it's time to get to work and make some ammo.